there's over 5,000 roller coasters on the planet, but there's a massive gap between the best and the worst, and even the average and the elite. I'm making this video for two reasons. The first is just so that I can have a bit of a debate about what makes a roller coaster good, because I think it will be an interesting video, but also I want to educate people that know a bit less about roller coasters, in the hope that they'll know what a good roller coaster is and encourage the parks to buy better roller coasters, not gimmicky or rubbish ones. First of all, I'd just like to say that what makes a roller coaster good definitely varies from person to person, so not everybody's gonna like the exact same thing in roller coaster, and it's also not a singular thing that makes roller coasters good, and it's quite often a combination of lots of different things. I'm gonna try to start with the more well-known and obvious points and then move on to the more obscure ones. So the main reason roller coasters are good are because of the different types of forces you experience while you're on them. And there's lots of different types of forces, some are more enjoyable than others, and they all provide different experiences on the rider. The first force, or type of force, is airtime. This is when you experience 0G or less and come out of your seat. It's very fun because it always feels like you're going to fly out of your seat, and is definitely essential to making lots of roller coasters good. Many roller coaster enthusiasts would argue that this is the most important thing they look for in a roller coaster, and many people argue that they're better than inversions and it's just more fun. There's two types of airtime, floater and ejector. Floater's more weak airtime where you rise out of your seat, and ejector is more violent. And most of the time ejector is more fun, but there are exceptions like on Shambhala, where if you get some really sustained floater, then it can be a lot better. The next thing is intensity. Intensity is also really important to making a good roller coaster. Intensity can be created in lots of different ways. Most common is just by having lots of positive forces and not having any dead spots. It's needed to make the ride feel out of control and extreme, because without intensity a ride is quite often boring. Intensity is just really important to creating a ride that makes the rider feel that they're not in control. Intensity is usually created by positive G-force. Positive G-force can feel more forceful depending on how it is used. For example, a ride that exerts 3 Gs for a very long amount of time can often feel a lot more extreme than a ride that pulls 4.5 Gs for a short amount of time. If enough positives are used, then you can experience a grey out where the blood starts to drain from your head and your vision goes grey. The company B&M often use lots and lots of positive forces in their ride, but not much else, and many people argue that this is boring because it only does one thing, which is use positive force. So really, if you're gonna just use positive force, you should combine it with something else. Like on a B&M invert, like Nemesis, the ride can be a lot more fun if it has a bit of whip to it on the inversions rather than just a lot of force. But positives are essential to creating the intensity to a ride. However, they do need to be used along with other things like linear, lateral and airtime forces. As I just mentioned, laterals are a sideways force which are most often experienced on an unbanked turn and on wooden coasters. Laterals are really good for creating the feeling that the ride's out of control, and can be really well placed on wooden coasters to push you out the side of the car. They can also be used to make transitions flow if they're really snappy, which helps keep the ride going. Which brings me on to my next point, which is pacing. Pacing is how well the ride keeps on going without having any dead spots or parts that feel less extreme. If a ride doesn't have good pacing, then it might have a really good section followed by a worse section where you lose the feeling that the ride's completely out of control.
Hey, boy, you got pacing issues.
Hey, there are a lot of issues.
Hey,
I need a tissue.
Hey.
The company RMC are very good at making well-paced coasters, because when the ride starts to slow down, they'll use lots of really small hills to keep the ride going without it slowing down. The final type of force I'm going to discuss is linear. These are probably a bit more rare than all the other forces because they're not really experienced that much during the ride unless it has a launch or a fast brake run. So linears are the forces that push you either into the back of your seat or push you forward into the restraint. The only time you'll really experience these is on a launch. Launches are very good ways to keep a ride going or to make it hold its speed. Quite often a launch alone doesn't just make it a good ride, and quite often launch coasters tend to be short because the launch is the main part of the ride. Although in some cases, like in Dodonpa in Japan, the launch can be the main focus of the ride if it is extremely fast. But overall, launches are just often a way of getting the ride up to speed, alternative to a lift hill. The other thing linears can be good at is that if you're on a back row of a drop, you can be pulled down it and you'll feel the force of you being pushed back into your seat. This next one is one of the most common things you'll ever find on a roller coaster, and it is inversions. Inversions aren't bad, in fact they can quite often be very good. There are many different types of inversions, and they all can provide different forces on the rider. Many people like inversions just because of the fact that you're upside down, and they can quite often find this exciting. However, the main problem with inversions is that they're quite often used just having lots of different inversions one after the other, which doesn't necessarily create a good ride. It just creates a ride that looks scary to the general public to make them want to go on it. Inversions can be very good if well paced, like on RMC roller coasters and Intamin Blitz roller coasters, but can quite often ruin the pacing of a ride, as it will just be one big element after the other. Well-timed, fast inversions that are thought out to create good pacing on the ride and not just inversion after inversion after inversion can be a very good change of pace to help keep the ride going. However, using inversions in excess can quite often just create a bit of a bland ride, like on many B&M flawless roller coasters like Scream at Six Flags Magic Mountain. And also the Smiler is an example of this. However, it does manage to still create a very good ride, although there are lots of airtime based rides that are much better than inversion based rides. But in this case of the Smiler, it does manage to combine lots of inversions with airtime in places. The next one's getting a bit rarer. It's hang time. So hang time is when you come out of your seat because you're upside down and there's not enough positive forces to keep you in your seat. It's quite common on Mack Mega coasters like Icon and Copperhead Strike, where it will go through an inversion very slowly and you'll get a very nice feeling where you get pulled towards the ground. Hang time's usually just a very fun moment, but it's quite hard to create a ride with good hang time and keep the pacing up. The next thing on my list is whip. Whip is when a force comes on very suddenly, or it's really just when you feel like you're being whipped around in the ride because of how fast the forces change. Quite commonly found on B&M roller coasters, and it's just used a lot to make elements more exciting. Quite often whip does depend on where you sit on a ride. That's the sensations I wanted to talk about that a ride gives you. And usually to make a good ride, you either want to do a few of them really well or combine them all to create a ride that has lots of different experiences in it and has a big variety of elements. A good example of a ride that does this well is just most of the Mack Mega coasters, including Icon at Blackpool Pleasure Beach and Helix at Leesburg. Rides like this combine inversions, airtime, positives and fast transitions to create a ride that's well paced and has everything you want in a roller coaster. Another good example of rides that combine lots of things to create a really good ride are RMC roller coasters. These use airtime as the focus, but also have lots of other things in them to make it not just one thing. Like they'll have good transitions between the elements, well-paced inversions, and they'll quite often do off-axis airtime moments or find different ways to give airtime, such as wave turns to vary it and keep the pacing going, rather than just having lots of different sized airtime hills. RMC combines all these different things in an unconventional way, thinking outside the box to create the best ride experience possible. And this is the reason why there's a lot of hype around RMCs, because all they do is make a really good ride. Anyway, these next few things are just lots of different things that can be used in any situation to make the ride better. The first thing I want to talk about is speed and height, because speed and height quite often don't make the ride very good. A good example of this is the big one at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. This ride is very tall and very fast, but it isn't especially good. This is because when they were designing it, they thought we want to make a tall and fast ride, but this didn't make them think about how the ride was going going to feel and what was going to make it good. For example, after the first drop, the big one just goes up at about a 20-degree angle in a straight line, and then heads down at about a 20-degree angle at a straight line. This makes the ride feel slow, even though it does have a lot of speed, and it doesn't actually do anything to the rider, it just goes along very quickly. The same thing goes for height. It doesn't make the coaster good alone, but one thing that speed and height can do is be used to make a roller coaster very good if you use them in the design of the ride experience. For example, B&M Hyper roller coasters are very tall and very fast, but they use this to their advantage by having lots of sustained airtime hills, which is something you couldn't do if you didn't have the speed and the height. But rides don't have to have lots of height and speed to feel fast. Lots of rides can just give the illusion or feeling of speed. For example, GCI roller coasters like Wicker Man feel like it's going fast because of the way the layout is designed and because of how close it is to the things around it. For example, wooden roller coasters quite often feel faster than they actually are because you're so close to the structure of it. And the same thing goes for rides that are built into the terrain really well. For example, Nemesis at Alton Towers, another ride that isn't especially fast and it only goes just over 50 miles an hour, goes in and out of the terrain the whole ride and gets very close to it, which makes it feel like you're going a lot faster than you actually are. The next thing is theming. Now, this can be quite a controversial one because theming can't be used to make a bad roller coaster good, but it can be used to make a roller coaster into a good overall experience. And lots of people who prefer to be immersed in the experience will argue that a well-themed ride is better than a not well-themed ride. However, theming structures and theming throughout the ride can be used to make the ride better. For example, going through a big structure or having lots of effects can definitely be used to make the ride more exciting. For example, Wicker Man at Alton Towers, where the structure is used as a tunnel and the fire is used to scare the riders. The next thing is terrain and head choppers, which I've kind of already explained. It can be used to create a feeling of speed, and then head choppers can be used to make the rider feel like they're going to hit something to make them move out of the way. Head choppers can be created by supports or any other objects the designer wants to place there, or just by making the ride very close to the terrain. The next thing is how smooth the ride is, or how painful the ride is. Most of the time, having a roller coaster smooth makes it better, because a rough or rattly ride can take the rider's mind off the ride itself and onto the roughness or maybe a rattle that the ride has. For example, on a Vekoma SLC, the layout of the ride isn't too bad, but because the ride is so painful and has a lot of headbanging, you can't think about the ride, you just think about how much it hurts. However, sometimes a bit of roughness or a bit of shakiness can be used to improve a ride. So you can definitely argue that having roughness on a wooden roller coaster makes it better because it helps to create that chaotic, out of control feeling where the rider's just being thrown about. But having this style of roughness never works if you have an over the shoulder restraint because it just provides pain on the head. Another good example of where roughness can actually improve the ride is on the Ultimate at Lightwater Valley. If this ride wasn't rough, it would be fairly boring, but the roughness provides the feeling where the ride's just out of control and can also make it just so bad that it's good in a way where you laugh at how bad the ride is. So that kind of answers the wood versus steel debate. Wooden coasters are used to create a sensation of speed, danger, unpredictability, and all these things are used to create a chaotic feeling where there's no way of controlling what's happening to the roller coaster. Another thing that can make a massive difference to how good the ride is the type of roller coaster. By this I mean whether the roller coaster is a sit-down roller coaster, or an inverted roller coaster, or a flying roller coaster, and so on. Most of the time this doesn't make a massive difference, and all it does is make the designer have to design a roller coaster differently. It can also make a difference to how rough the ride is. If the designer can use the type of roller coaster to its advantage, then it can make a big difference. For example, a sit-down roller coaster with a lap bar can be used to provide lots of airtime, but an inverted roller coaster can be used to provide lots of positive forces. There are some exceptions, however, because rides like 4D roller coasters can be used to provide an experience or a sensation that no other ride can provide. The next one is restraints. Quite often, roller coasters that aren't that special can be made absolutely fantastic by having a certain type of restraint. For example, lots of wooden roller coasters like Phoenix at Knoebels and Coaster at Playland have what's called a buzz bar, where the lap bar will only lock in one position. This means that riders can experience ridiculous amounts of airtime and will turn an average roller coaster into a world-class one. Generally, lap bars are always better than over-the-shoulder restraints because you're less restricted and you can experience the airtime more. They also make a big difference to the comfort of the ride, but sometimes it is necessary to use an over-the-shoulder restraint. Another thing is uniqueness. This will only really make a difference to how much you enjoy the roller coaster if you've ridden lots before, because if you've ridden lots and lots of different roller coasters, then riding a roller coaster that's unique and different can definitely improve the ride. But to most people who haven't ridden many roller coasters, it won't make that much of a difference. Another thing is location, because if a ride has an absolutely amazing view or is in a certain place, then it can improve the ride, like Wildfire at Kolmården in Sweden. The next thing is the length of the ride, because having a very short ride can often just make you come off the roller coaster thinking that was short rather than that was great. But if a roller coaster is long, it has to be used to make it feel relentless and unforgiving, because quite often just having a long ride can be boring. For example, Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point uses its length to just be relentless throughout the whole ride, so that by the end of it you feel overwhelmed by how much of the ride has been this extreme. For some people, the historical or sentimental value of a roller coaster can make it better for them, because some people like to appreciate all the historical value of a ride, and others might have a ride that they have a big personal connection to that brings back a lot of nostalgia. Another thing that can make a ride more exciting is how dangerous the ride feels, because quite often introducing an element of danger can make the ride more exciting, although in most cases, unless you're in China, the roller coaster is perfectly safe. And then the last thing I want to talk about is fun, because overall the thing that should determine how good a roller coaster is how fun it is. A way to make a roller coaster fun is by combining all of these different types of forces and sensations I mentioned towards the start of the video. So, to conclude, a good roller coaster should usually offer a good variety of lots of different sensations and should provide a chaotic, out of control feeling. RMC roller coasters are usually very good because they combine all these forces in a different way but do one thing really well. They use airtime as their biggest focus, and then they make lots of off-axis moments and crazy transitions and different ways of producing this sensation to vary it and make it feel unforgiving, and then this just makes the ride overall fantastic. Although there's lots of different ways to make a ride good through force, inversions, airtime, speed, and all of these different things, although a lot of people might comment that what makes roller coasters good is airtime, ultimately everybody else has their different opinion and everybody likes certain rides more than others, so it really just does depend on the person. But let me know in the comments below what you think makes a good ride, and please give me some constructive criticism. Leave a like if you like the video, leave a dislike if you dislike the video, and subscribe if you want more. And remember that all the people that own the video clips used in this video are linked in the description, so don't forget to check them out, and I will see you in the next video.